Anne B asks, are there common things that people get wrong when they try to put taking children seriously into practice? Is there something you'd like to see added to or changed about the TCS website? So, takingchildrenseriously.com hasn't been updated for like a decade. The first thing that should change about it is Sarah should give ownership of it to someone else who actually is interested in it. I was never a big fan of that particular website though. Like, I don't think it was very well organized. I don't think that the blog type format was a good idea. The original website, tcs.ac, used like a list of essays rather than a blog format, which made more sense. I think that organized lists of essays by category, but not by like chronology, would be good. And takingchildrenseriously.com has essays from people who don't really know what they're talking about. Like, it's too inclusive with posts from like random people or something. I don't know why Sarah did it. Like, I think she was trying to do outreach or something, but like, people who aren't the best authors shouldn't be writing like the main post that you hold up as like, here's how to learn TCS and what to do. Like, the original website had a collection of like highly curated posts, most of which were written by Sarah and David. And that was a good place for people to start. And then they switched it to like a blog, and a lot of the posts were by like random people. And a lot of the posts put up were just like new things rather than like, let's gather the best things David ever wrote and put those up. It was like, well, David's not writing a lot of new stuff, so we'll just put up some random people. And Sarah wasn't writing a lot of new stuff, so just put up some random people. It was dumb. So, yeah, there should be more like uh, an actual organized set of things to read. There's a lot of ways it could be improved. Like, it's not hard to improve. Like, the website is old and not updated and not very well thought out. The website was never primary. Like, the discussion list was the primary thing. And like, when the website had kind of random people on it, it was basically like the kind of stuff you would have on the discussion group, which is fine as here's a bunch of discussion, but it shouldn't be like the canonical version of TCS. The biggest thing people get wrong trying to do TCS is that they don't understand what it is, that it's a philosophy, and that you have to understand the philosophy in order to do it. And that includes things like understanding David Deutsch's books. Like, Popper and Deutsch aren't optional. Especially Deutsch, because he summarizes a lot of Popper. So you can, get most of the philosophy stuff just from Deutsch. And like, reading Popper is for going into more depth and getting more details and stuff. But like, the Deutsch stuff is just, if you don't know that, then how are you going to do TCS? Because TCS is taking philosophy and applying it to an area of life. That's what it is. If you're just thinking TCS means be nice to your kids and some other like slogans and stuff, then that's not TCS. That's just parenting informed by some slogans that might make it a bit better. Which is not like the worst thing in the world, it's just not TCS. That's not as much of a problem lately. Like, few people are trying to begin TCS lately because there isn't enough outreach reaching like new parents. And because the tone of the community has changed and has become more philosophical. Like, as I became the loudest voice and the most informed voice, then it became a lot harder to miss the philosophy part. And like, if you go on fallibleideas.com and you click on the Taking Children Seriously essay, it's very focused on TCS is about applying philosophy to parenting. It doesn't open with let's try to be nice to our kids or whatever, like, sort of fluffy thing people sometimes think is TCS. It's not just educational philosophy that's important. It's also political philosophy, like, or sort of the essence of political philosophy, maybe more moral philosophy that's has to be applied to how you deal with children, which means liberal ideas like freedom and property rights and individual rights and autonomy and the pursuit of happiness, and trying to deal with people in voluntary ways and not using force against people, and trying to deal with people through reason instead of authority. Those kinds of attitudes that are behind classical liberalism are things that you should also be applying to your children, not just your neighbors. And those ideas are connected to the philosophy of knowledge. If you understand both them and the philosophy of knowledge well enough, then you'll be able to see ways they relate to each other and work together, and why the Popperian way of thinking about the philosophy of knowledge implies things about political philosophy like freedom, and implies things about how people should treat each other, and how understanding reason helps provide a foundation for moral and political philosophy, which are a bit incomplete if you don't actually understand things like how learning works and how problem solving works and whether we're fallible. Like, things like that are actually really relevant to how society should be organized and how people should deal with each other. Another notable thing about what people have done when they've tried to do TCS is a lot of them just haven't discussed it very much. Like, they'll post a few times, or they'll post regularly for a few months, and they don't keep up the discussions throughout like their entire parenting. Like, if you're going to be actively a parent a lot for like 20 years, shouldn't you be discussing it and trying to get advice and help for 20 years? Or even before you start parenting. You should really know what you're doing before you get started, because like, you don't know how long it's going to take you to learn enough to be ready to start. So you better learn enough that you're satisfied you know what you're doing enough to begin parenting and not fuck it up at the beginning. Which, you can't be perfect, but you can have some reasonable standard of, I think I'm like sort of ready. You need to do that before you get pregnant, because you don't know how long it's going to take you to do that. It's like if you were going to study economics and then make a YouTube video explaining economics to people. You wouldn't want to schedule your filming date until you'd actually learned economics, and you're more or less done, because you wouldn't know how long it's going to take you to learn the field. Maybe it'll take a year, maybe it'll take 2 years. Like, you can't know in advance that kind of thing. It's not predictable, like how deep a field it is. You don't know how much there is to learn until you start learning it. And you don't know how fast you'll learn and how many mistakes you'll make along the way. You can't predict like what mistakes you'll make and how severe they'll be and how long they'll take to deal with. None of this requires perfection. Like, you can learn economics well enough to make a video and be happy with it, even though you don't know everything about it. But it's just whatever your standard is for well enough. You have to get there first and then make the video. And you don't know how long it will take to reach your good enough point that you think is adequate for your purpose. Another thing people do wrong with TCS, and this is related to getting started with the parenting before learning what they're doing, is they have multiple children. And multiple children makes it way, way harder, and it's irreversible. And parenting is hard enough with one child, and then if you have multiple children, now it's more than twice as hard if you have 2 children instead of 1. Which people don't expect or realize. They think that like a second child will make it 25% harder instead of like 200% harder. But it's like, if you have 1 child, you can be in one place at once. That's no problem. You can like follow your child around like all day and help him with whatever and be available. Like, you might get tired and things might go wrong, but you can do that. But what if you have 2 children? You can't be in 2 places at once. If they want to go to different places, you're in trouble. You already have to start like taking both children to the same activity, even though that's not necessarily their individual preference. Now, if you have 2 parents, then 2 children can be like somewhat manageable, because you could both help them, except that one of the parents at least probably has a job, so a lot of the time there's only one parent available. And then if you've got up to like 3 children and they want to be at 3 different places doing 3 different things and all being helped, like how are you going to manage that? So more children is just like a lot harder, and people make enough mistakes and have enough grief and misery and disasters and fighting with one child, and their resources are stretched thin enough with one child. And part of how they manage to have multiple children is they just don't give the children as much resources as would benefit the child. Like, they make the children share computers, and they don't let the children have iPhones until, much older. But the child would have liked it a lot and benefited from it sooner. And they just didn't have enough money or whatever. And if they had less children, then there would have been more money to go around. Another thing is, if you're going to interact with your children in philosophically enlightened ways, you have to figure out how to do that. And to some extent, that involves things like telling your children about philosophy and telling your children about TCS. But people do that in not very good ways. Like, there's different things people do. One of the things people do is they talk to their kids as if their kids were FI posters, as if their kids were just like philosophers. And that often doesn't work very well because their kids aren't philosophers. They're not that type of person. They don't post on FI. They're perhaps young. They perhaps don't read books much. If your child wouldn't want to read Rand or David Deutsch or whatever, then you probably shouldn't talk to them like you would talk to me, who does like to read those things and communicates in a different way. So there's the people like that, and then there's other people who like don't really talk philosophically to their kids like at all, and their kids are like don't know enough about the philosophy behind what the parents are trying to do. And it's hard to have a way of interacting with your kid if your kid isn't like involved with it, if your kid doesn't like care about it and take interest in it and actually want to read articles about TCS and understand what's going on more. There's been broadly not very many children of TCS interested parents who have posted to the discussion lists very much. And that's a concern. There's something screwy there. Like, why don't they want to post? Don't they find TCS like super valuable and rational and helpful? Don't they want to use it in their own life, like when they eventually have their own kids? Don't they want to learn more about like Popper and reason and freedom and so on, so they can be good people and so they can be effective problem solvers? Don't they see all this value in their parents' methods and approaches and stuff, and want to learn more about it so they can be as wise and competent and effective and so on as their parents are? Aren't they like, wow, you're so impressive, like I meet all these other people, I've met the neighbors, I've talked to people that aren't you, and you're so much better, so of course I want to learn from some of the same places you learned. Like, why aren't kids reacting that way? Well, it's because a lot of the people interested in TCS just aren't actually all that wise and haven't learned enough. And that doesn't mean they're worse than other people or below average or anything like that. It just means that, there might not be a lot of TCS actually there or happening.